With us in studio here at Michigan's Morning Show, all across the Michigan Talk Network this morning, is Bernard Zeitler. Pronounce that right?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. You wrote a new book, How to Win as a High Roller While Losing Your Shirt. And I found it interesting. You sent this book in here, and I took a read, and I enjoyed it. And one of the things we're trying to do here on the show is have authors in from different places around Michigan. You're grew up in Breckenridge and now live in Albion. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Give me an idea, though. You became a gambler at what age?
Actually, gambling, as far as what they consider within the gambling community, would have been later in life. As a teenager, when they came out with scratch-off tickets, is what was my deal. The odd thing is, I grew up around casinos and never really had an interest in the casinos.
Now, why do you think that is? But the scratch-off tickets had a special appeal for you.
Quick and easy is probably the best way. Times you have, if you have difficulties at home, and I worked in a convenience store, so I didn't really care much to go home after work. So I'd do that until my ex was sleeping, and then I'd go home. And by the time I had to go back to work, by the time she went to work, I was sound asleep. So it was kind of an avoidance technique. So I
don't know if you've seen this commercial. There's a commercial, a public service announcement that's been running on television here recently, where the guy's sitting in his car.
Yes.
And trying to talk to his wife, and obviously he can hear his daughter in the background. And what do you mean I don't? And she hangs up on him for the gambling problem hotline. And I look at that. I think it's a very effective commercial. And I think that there are a lot of people who, you can't go around Michigan without seeing a casino anymore, and talk of building more, and the advent of these scratch-off tickets and so forth. I mean, gambling. If you want to gamble, you don't have to travel very far to do it. The next gas station down the street, you can gamble.
you can do it on your iPhone now too.
So you can pretty much gamble anywhere.
No, I don't. I never did, and never will. Back in 2007, when I quit, I actually ended up in the hospital. So, suicidal depression. I had almost lost my job. I had a local convenience store and switched over to a different store. But during the time between when stuff came up with that and going on, I had the opportunity to go into the hospital, deal with the depression and suicidal issues, and since then I've stayed away from the doggone things. But it's kind of odd because scratch-offs are things people don't usually think of as an addiction.
Well, that's why this caught my attention. I don't think of scratch-off tickets as being something that's that addictive. However, and Joanne, you've probably done the same thing. I've stood in line to pay for gasoline and whatever, and gotten frustrated because there's somebody in front of me going, "No, I want that ticket. No. Give me two of those." And I want, no, I'll take one of those over. And they sit there for 5 minutes debating it because they've got, there's 30 or 40 different scratch-off tickets available in some places, right? I mean, there's a whole load of them.
Some places there's as many as 60 to 70, actually.
Really? So anyhow, we've all stood there, but I never would have thought that would be an addictive behavior. But now when I looked at your book and I thought, gosh, that can be a problem for people. Now, for yourself, you worked at a convenience store. I would find that akin to an alcoholic being your bartender. If you're hooked on these tickets and they're all behind you, as many as 60 or 70,
yeah.
I mean, your whole paycheck could disappear.
Yeah, that's true. And the odd thing is that even after I started recovery in 2007, I worked until 2011, I believe it was, at the convenience store, and I was selling the tickets. One of the things I had to keep telling myself when I saw somebody come in and they'd be spending large sums of money on tickets, is when they'd have a loser and stuff, or I'd seen them in there regular, I always had the phrase, "The next one's a winner," and that's kind of the mentality. It's you don't really think about how much the money is. It's never about the money, and that's something that a friend of mine taught me through the meetings and stuff. And he's actually written a book as well, but his book was all about the casino gambling he did in Canada, because they didn't have the casinos here.
I think the worst thing that you could have happen is
you sell the winning ticket?
No. That I can see where that would be a problem
After
for Bernard.
putting all that money into it, and then you sell it to somebody
That's
else?
a really good observation. I'll give you that. But no, if you're young, as let's say you're 16, 17 years old, and you buy, I think you actually have to legally be 18, but you buy a ticket at whatever age, and the first one's a winner. That's the worst thing that can happen, I would think. A $5 winner, $10 winner?
Actually, I'd have to say no, that's not.
Really?
I did it for fun. When you go out and play horse or something like that, basketball-wise, you're doing it for fun. And really, that's what the gambling's about in the end, is it's about a rush. The same thing happens in the brain with a compulsive gambler, compulsive eater, those kind of addictions, as does with the drugs and stuff. And it's amazing if you take a look at the history of it, that it just really, people don't see it coming. You don't see it coming.
So do you? Okay, so you make a fair point. Where did you cross over from, a couple of scratch tickets to a compulsion?
Somewhere at some point, I stopped picking up one now and then, which is back when I was in high school, and I really can't tell you the exact time. I do know that for about 5 or 10 years before it hit the rubber on it, that I was doing enough to keep me from going home. It was an avoidance technique. I never looked at how much I was spending, and if I won something, I'd keep playing it until I lost that, and that's something that's really hard to see. And I've had people say, "Well, I don't have a problem. I only do it once in a while." That's how it started with me, and in the process of writing the book, I had to look back in my childhood, and it's that competitive nature that's there, and that's what gets you going.
So anybody can fall victim to this?
I wouldn't doubt it for a bit, largely because if you went into a restaurant, you don't go in there for one fry. You go in for the whole meal. And when you're going for gambling or anything like that, you're going for the whole experience. And that's what it is.
And it's like, you strike on that competitive thing, I don't like losing, and you always want to win, and you always go out a winner. But the problem is, like you just said, you buy a ticket that actually wins some money, then, well, maybe I can win more. It just never ends. Yeah,
and the sad thing is I've heard people say they break even, and my mentality with that is this. If you went in with $20, you got $500 to $1,000, so you've got a pocket full of money in your pocket, and you walk out with that same $20, you didn't break even, because the highest amount you had is what you had, as what you...
It's your high watermark, sure.
It's your watermark. That's what you had. If you broke even, you'd leave with the same amount of money that you were at the highest point.
Bernard Zeitler in the studio with us this morning. He has just written a book, How to Win as a High Roller While Losing Your Shirt. It's 41 past the hour. When we come back, we'll get into how much money you did spend, and more importantly, how do people recover from this? What is your advice for getting away from, your poison was scratch-off tickets? Bernard Zeitler wrote the book, How to Win as a High Roller While Losing Your Shirt. Now, didn't ask you this before the break. Your poison was these scratch-off tickets, and you're working in convenience stores and so forth, so it's like, somebody who drinks too much standing behind the bar serving drinks, the temptation's there constantly. You can't get away from it. I mean, you're surrounded by it. How much did you spend? Do you have any idea?
I have no idea how much I spent on scratch-offs at the height of it. All I know is that it was enough to keep me busy, and I went to the ATM at least 3 different times on one of my last runs, and I didn't take small amounts out.
Like 3 times in a day?
No, 3 times within about an hour and a half after work.
Well.
Wow, that's big.
I mean, your hand would have been bloody from all that scratching, I would think.
And which games did you play? We'll stay away from those because you didn't win.
Hell no, I did win. There's times I won.
Big?
I've had some fairly decent ones, but not big enough to
offset.
Not big enough for the government to know about or anything like that.
What was your biggest winner? Do you remember? Or does it matter anymore?
For me, it really doesn't matter. My biggest win was when I stopped, because I went to my first meeting. I listened to all the stories, and the first thing I did after listening to the stories is to go out of there and saying I'm not that bad. And I didn't accept I had a problem until I went down to the gas station just a little ways down the road where they had a scratch off and bought a $1 ticket. After listening to the stories of people's lives being destroyed, and when you hear about people that have been in prison, which I haven't. Other than to work there.
Right, and hopefully you won't be now, because
I never will. I refuse to go back to the gambling in one of its...
But you leave a Gamblers Anonymous meeting, go to the first gas station and buy a scratch-off ticket. Telling yourself you're okay.
Telling myself I'm not as bad as they are, I don't have a problem.
When did you change your mind?
That I had a problem?
Yeah, when did you realize that, they weren't bad people really either? They just had some...
When I bought that ticket, after that meeting, I swore I'd never buy another one, and I haven't.
Well, good for you.
That's what I had to do. I had to realize I had a problem, and to listen to the stories of destruction and be able to go out of there and do any kind of gambling. It's just horrible. And part of the reason for the book is to try to get people to understand what compulsive gambling is, because once it's gotten to the point where there's I've seen on TV they've got the commercial where the guy's sitting in the car.
Right.
Really, what would be a great commercial is to have them showing the family together, and then one of the people being off to the casino or to a gambling establishment during a positive event for one of the kids or for something that they should be at, and showing the progression. Because once you start missing those events, that is an easier time to catch it than when it gets to the point where you're kicked out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I find interesting here, I'm just going to read a quick quote from your book here. I head toward the addiction again. The addiction is still a deep hole. I pretend it does not exist. I fall into it again. I can't believe I'm back in the hole, but I'm still blaming others. It again takes forever to escape. This is from your book. And what I found interesting about the book as you go through it, each chapter you talk about your addiction and then ultimately recovery and staying away. It's almost like a workbook. It has places for thoughts, excuse me, and reflections in there so people can work themselves through this and take notes for themselves on their own situation. It's a study guide on how not to gamble.
It's a guide for people to look at it and see if it's happening in their family, if they're it, or if somebody else is. It allows them to kind of get an understanding of it and write down what their understandings are. Because and the reason I left those pages was for that purpose.
Mm-hmm. When you see people in Super Bowl bets and March Madness and getting involved in all those brackets, putting a lot of money on the line, I mean, how does that make you feel? I mean, there are a lot of people out there who gamble. I
feel bad for them, actually, but I feel bad for them, but there's not a whole lot that I can do to stop them. And there are people that they're okay with it. They do it once in a while, and they'll survive. I know people that haven't lost everything that still have a problem.
Do people come to you and say, listen, you wrote this book, Bernard, you're not gambling anymore? How long has it been since that last ticket after that meeting?
November 21st, 2007 was my last bet. And that was the first meeting and my last bet because I walked out of there and did the scratch-offs. Prior to that, I spent 10 days in the hospital and couldn't gamble. However, when you brought up the sport, I was talking to one of the techs, and I would talk about football. I'm a big fan of Green Bay Packers, so that season I was telling him, we would talk about who's going to win and do that kind of stuff. And it had nothing to do with money, but it had to do with pride because I knew that they were going to win. That year, I would have done rather well. As a matter of fact, the Super Bowl year that Aaron Rodgers had, I would have done very, very, very well.
Well, one of the things you talk about.
How do you live with that?
Yeah.
How do I live with that?
You would have struck it rich.
I wouldn't have struck it rich, but I would have done well. The problem is, I know that in order to get there, the year after I was heading the same path, I'd have been doing good all season. And at the end, what happened?
Well, one of the things you talk about later in your book is ego and superego, and earlier here in the conversation, you talked about not wanting to lose, the desire to win when you scratch those tickets. How big a role does ego play? We don't have a lot of time left here, but is it an ego-driven thing oftentimes, gambling?
Sometimes, not always. With me, it wasn't so much the ego as it was, and for me, it's more an ego thing not to gamble. Because if I start gambling, I'm going to go back down a place where I want things, and it's not necessarily wanting anything. And the intention, like I said, as a result of all the stuff that's gone on, I've gone to the point where I want to get people aware of what the path is and where it goes. And quite often with gamblers, they also drink, smoke,
problems,
other things. Most of them have had other addictions, and they all roll together.
Well, Bernard, where can people find your book?
Right now, it's available through Smashwords, Amazon, and I believe that it's on Barnes & Noble as well. But Two Moon Press has it available.
Okay, Two Moon Press.
And if they want a signed copy, they can contact me directly through my link on the thing, gambling recovery on Facebook. Has it attached.
All right, Bernard Zeitler, thank you so much. How to win as a high roller while losing your shirt. Hey, congratulations, by the way, for not buying a ticket today.